Hi, everyone, and welcome to our pre-recorded panel. I'm here today with Ginger. How are you going, Ginger?
Hi Mel, I'm very well, thank you. How's Canberra like?
Well, actually, it's not as good as the picture behind me at the moment, unfortunately. This morning, it's been pretty foggy, pretty grey, but we are getting towards the shortest day of the year. So in Canberra, that's what we have to expect. You're in Sydney, aren't you?
Yes, I am in Sydney and I welcome everyone to my home. This is my lounge. Basically, you could see the backdrop behind me. Yeah.
I love that artwork behind you.
Yeah, it's my nod to NAIDOC week, although we're not there yet. But yeah,
Fantastic. Well,
brings a bit of color.
have the opportunity to chat to you today all about business continuity planning and rethinking how we do that and some risk mitigation strategies. Things that the COVID crisis has really, I suppose, brought into sharp focus for both of our organisations.
Most definitely.
Yeah, so I suppose maybe the first question is, what has the crisis demonstrated for your organisation when you're thinking about BCP? So I know for mine, what we've really, I suppose, become very sharply focused is just how reliant we are on our myriad outsourcing and offshoring arrangements. Which is great because when we went into these partnerships, we wanted them to be really strong and stable partnerships, but we've now got this mutual reliance, which is very difficult to strip back. And I think what the second thing that we've also worked out is that possibly our whole business continuity planning approach hasn't been quite as, I don't know, doom-ridden as maybe it should have been. We've been thinking about how do we maintain our same level of operations as opposed to how we respond if there was something that really almost broke the way that our organisation worked. What do you think? What's it been like for you?
So basically in Optus, what we did, because we rely heavily on our outsourcing partners, and these are like across different sites in India and Philippines, and obviously onshore teams in Australia. So what COVID actually gave us an opportunity to do was accelerate a different way by which we service our customers. So what we started to do is basically creating communities of practice, which we call team of experts. So different experts are actually formed in one community. So customers are segmented by a geolocation, and all the customers in that specific segment actually get routed to a specific community. And that specific community can then serve the customer with any inquiries they might have with regards to Optus products. It could be billing, could be payments, it could be NBN, could be anything. But what really that does, the benefit of that is you don't transfer customers anymore. You know, it's so annoying when we get transferred from pillar to post and then you speak to different people at different times. But what this does is shorten the call waiting time, shorten the call volumes, and create a better experience for the customer. So what we actually created was a community wherein people are co-located. And what that means is it's not just one specialized expert per product line. You know, like one person can be an expert across many different products. And because they're co-located, they could actually have organic learning and learn from each other just by being together. So the impact is, you know, it obviously the COVID, no one expected it to happen, but what it allowed us to do is create that opportunity to accelerate that type of model, the text way of working is what we call it.
I love the way that you've built your customer service model around the whole customer life cycle, not segmented like it normally is. Is that something that you had been planning to do beforehand, or is it something that really was an idea when we all had to go into lockdown?
Yeah, so that was actually something that has been in the works, and it was actually patterned after T-Mobile. T-Mobile is an international telecoms company that actually implemented this type of model, but it was a 3-year program, which really was accelerated to be implemented in a few months. COVID was just a catalyst for us to actually accelerate the program. Yeah. So we used it as an opportunity, which is great, really. Yeah.
So we did sort of a similar thing. Like we had already done a soft rollout of Microsoft Teams. So my group had sort of rolled that out 18 months ago, 2 years ago. But we'd had a lot of resistance, people going, oh, you know, why would I want to use this? Because we're really trying to push it as a collaborative platform. So sharing of documents, sharing of ideas, much more around that continuous improvement, rapid improvement sort of thinking. And it was fine. People would go to training and they'd use it, but no one was really using it until we all had to start working at home. And all of a sudden people went, oh, actually, I can see why this is, you know, something that you've been trying to roll out. So that was one thing that really just took off. What we found, though, was that we hadn't actually sorted out with our outsource partners who was actually going to support Microsoft Teams. We got to this point where we were pushing out this the technology and saying this is how we're going to have to communicate, but we didn't actually have a tech support background. So we had to sort of hastily build that in the background and work out who was going to be supporting what. But yeah, without the crisis and everyone having to work from home, there's no way that we would have picked up quickly and just moved to be much more virtual. We did that a lot also in the teaching space as well. So for many years, there's been lots of conversations around, you know, can you actually teach all types of disciplines remotely or online? And a lot of academics had always thought, I'm really hesitant to try and do this type of work online because it works a lot better face-to-face. Now, there are some things that work better face-to-face, but we've now had this massive real-time experiment to see what can we actually deliver online and what do the students actually feel about that online experience. So what's been really interesting for us is to look at the satisfaction levels from our students and our staff as we've changed the way that we've developed our services.
So what are the key call-outs, Mel, in terms of, you know, satisfaction? What are the positives and what are the downsides to obviously remote working and remote learning in your organization?
Yeah, so we had most of our staff are actually quite happy working remotely.
Yes.
It's interesting, and now we're struggling to actually convince people, well, maybe you should come back into the office. Maybe that would be a good thing. But it's probably also identified the difference in personalities of some of our groups. So we've got some teams who all want to work at home, some teams who thrive on that, you know, social needing to be in the office. It's difficult for us now, though, because we have brought quite a number of our students back on to campus. And if we've got our students face-to-face and on campus, then we really need to have our staff population on campus as well. Really, if nothing else, to create that vibe that there is a wonderful, living, exciting campus experience for students. And you're not just coming in and going to a lecture and then coming back. For our students, a lot of them found it a lot easier to actually attend online lectures and to engage in an online way. But then the flip side of that is you've got some students who, particularly the ones who might need more support or who may be a little bit more, you know, reclusive or introverted, it's not been as wonderful for them. And we're really trying to work hard. We are working hard to make sure that no one is slipping through the cracks. So we're looking a lot at a lot of the analytics. So are there groups of students who aren't logging in? Are there groups of students who aren't submitting assessments? So we've really had to change the way that we've looked at the analytics to try and flag students who might actually need that little bit of, because they're not coming, you know, into that face-to-face contact.
Yeah, in Optus, obviously, we also have our what we call the Optus campus in Sydney. And it's obviously a big campus wherein there's always something happening. There's always, it's very buzzy. So during COVID, obviously that was, you know, very quiet. And now there's obviously a push for more people to go back to campus. And like yourselves, you know, it's a bit of a slow start. But I guess the way we talk about it is there's such a thing as individual productivity and organizational productivity. So while we are very efficient in terms of producing our output, doing our work individually, working from home, the organizational productivity is not as high. So there is benefit in collaboration and I guess face-to-face, you know, those sidebar conversations, those instant opportunities for ideation, which can only happen spontaneously, and you can't do that online. So I guess that's what we're finding as well, which is obviously exciting. I myself enjoy as well working from home as a lot of people do. And I think what it did as well was actually broke through a lot of maybe classic ways of thinking, of working, or managing and leadership styles as well. Because before, traditionally, there is a bias towards presenteeism, right? Whereas this actually allowed us to realize that, work outputs and productivity isn't really affected as much. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Just because just before we went into lockdown, well, actually before COVID, we'd had bushfires here as well. So we'd had a little taste of not being able to go onto campus before we went into lockdown. But just before then, we just moved about 200 of our professional staff into an activity-based working space, which means no one had an allocated or a fixed desk, and it was much more about trying to use those collaborative spaces. Sitting at a desk when you needed to, sitting in a collaborative hub when you needed to, having a quiet space when you needed to. So getting people to move around based on the type of work that they were doing. And we've done a lot of work with our managers to really try and break what you were calling that classic, thinking I need to see my team, all 6, 7, 8, 9 of my team sitting there typing away busily to make sure that they're actually working. So I think we were lucky in that we'd already invested a fair amount of time into developing principles around, how can I ensure that my team have got the right levels of support? How do I feel that they're getting the supervision and support that they need without being able to see them every moment of the day? So surprisingly, we'd been sort of organised around that ABW piece and trying to roll out teams as well.
Yeah. I think in Optus we're quite fortunate in the sense that we're already very flexible in terms of our working arrangements. So transitioning into remote working wasn't too much of a stretch for the team. What the team felt though that was lacking was the social interaction. Yeah. So and sometimes it's annoying because when you have meetings that have 20 participants, not all of them are on video, so you can't really see anyone. Or when you talk to them, they're busily doing something else. So I think it's the way you just manage expectations. So for example, in my team, I just make sure when we have meetings, everyone's on video so that everyone's present. And you have to be a bit more manufactured in the way you run meetings as well. I know it's quite clinical, but you have to be quite intentional as well and a bit more prepared. Otherwise, it just,
Not quite wing as many things as you used to, yeah.
Yeah, well, people have an attention of a pea, right?
I loved what you said about being more intentional and thinking about your people. Something that is something we've had to face during COVID is one of our major offshore partners is in India.
Yes.
Partnered with them since 2009. So we have really strong relationships with a lot of the staff there. And they've obviously been having a really tough time and probably more difficult than a lot of the staff here in Canberra may have been having it. So what we've really also been trying to encourage is for staff to understand that our offshore partners, our offshore team, are people as well, and to just demonstrate that level of empathy and flexibility when they're actually seeking some service delivery, or if they're saying, oh, well, why hasn't my password been changed 30 seconds after I put a service desk request in? Like, come on. In the scheme of things, is that really as important as it should be? Yeah. That's been an interesting one for us. But I think what we've also seen happening with our staff is, and also with our students, the services that they need have changed. So what we needed before we went into lockdown is not the same as what we need today or now. Now, maybe it's not quite the same at Optus because people still have their mobile phones or their NBN, and they obviously still need their NBN to be working if they're at home doing video calls. But for our staff and students, the services they're consuming are quite different to what they were. Because a lot of the services that we were delivering were for, specifically on-campus based services. So our planning probably hadn't really picked up the fact that if we had to work remotely, we're actually going to need to deliver different things. So I think that's been a learning for us as well. We've
Mm.
flexible and work out, well, what's actually a priority now for our staff? And how do we reprioritize the services that we're delivering? What sort of service level agreements can we build around them in an agile way as we're like working through this? And is that what we're going to need in 12 months' time? So I think we've had a real shift in what we're consuming and what we need to succeed.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And you could see some really interesting patterns and trends there, and behaviors would change as well because of the crisis and what people have had to do to adapt. So you could see some interesting ways of working that organically just shifts and just changes. With Optus as well, when we did our communities, it was we probably have 50 communities. So that means 50 sites across India and Philippines and Australia. And that's basically the contact center teams, right? So it's a massive, massive transformation program. And because we had to accelerate like a 3-year program into like 6 months, the pace of change for the people who are supporting the customers is so high. So you could imagine the stress, right? So how we mitigate that is we created what we're calling like a team of experts change operational network, so that each community had 2 representatives. What I did there is basically gather them, have fortnightly sessions, and do listening sessions to understand, okay, what are their concerns? What are they struggling with? What are their pain points? How can we help? What's the gap? And then feed that back to the program team so that as we introduce changes and develop our training modules to train them up, we're very cognizant of what they're going through. And it's interesting because offshore team and onshore teams, they have different challenges, right? More so our offshore teams in India and Philippines, they struggled so much with getting to work, transportation, basic connectivity. Not all of them are allowed to work from home because of security reasons. So just getting to site obviously takes twice as long.
Yeah.
They're also worried about their finances, their security. Some of the feedback we received were so raw and very humbling because they say, well, I don't have a choice. It's not safe to go to work, but I have to work to survive, to feed my family. So it really, opens you up. Whereas in Australia, we're a bit fortunate here, wherein we don't really have to deal with a lot of those security issues. But those are some of the things that we need to be cognizant of as we introduce change, because they're the ones who are serving our customers. They're the ones in the coal phase, and they're the ones who are experiencing so much strife and challenges. So it was a very interesting 12 months to sort of introduce that program. And in a way, because we actually co-located different team of experts in communities, it became a family. So instead of just going to work, we created a community wherein it became a refuge because they don't have a choice, right? But at least creating that safe harbor for them when they go to work, and at least, create a bit of fun in the whole process. So that alleviated some of the stress. But the operational network, the change network, actually helped because that was the main feedback source from the ground, from the coal face. Whereas if we introduce it without that, we'll just be introducing changes from the ivory tower, so to speak.
I love that you listened, that they had a voice. They were in such difficult circumstances, but you still gave them that voice and you fed that voice into the change process, which, that's just beautiful. That's made my heart go.
Well, that's my forte, right? And I have to make sure that they have a voice because they're the ones who are serving our customers. So, I guess there's a saying that you're only as good as your most disgruntled employee. So if they front up, not happy, not engaged, not motivated, without any purpose, then it's going to show. And like you said before, Mel, I mean, they're human beings too, right? So it was quite an eye-opening experience for everyone especially the leadership team, because they, I guess their roles is to drive change. We have to do this at this point, at this time, we have to deliver X, Y, and Z. But it was a bit of a wake-up call as well, that hang on a minute, guys. When you introduce change, you have to, introduce it in a very considered manner as well. Yeah. So that was
really, really applaud that. It has been such a raw sort of time. I mean, some of the stories that we're hearing from our own students when we're listening to what they need now, particularly international students who remained in Australia, who have had no supports, like listening to them and hearing their voices around, well, what's important to you? Well, you don't want the service on campus anymore for, getting your student card replaced, but what you actually need is food. So one of the things that our student association did essentially was to set up a food pantry. So it became more important for us in that space, our UCX space, the union space, to be meeting those basic needs for our students, as opposed to anything high tech like, recording their group chat so that they could be submitting it as presentations through Canvas. It was much more basic. And again, just reminded all of us that, we need to work as a community and we need to support everyone in the community to work through this.
And I guess the reason why it was so successful, and we're still going, it's still going, the program, was it was a community. We created communities of not just teams, but communities. So each community is almost like its own microcosm, its own family. It can survive on its own. And each community have experts, they have coaches, and they have what we're calling the community leads to make sure that we monitor the health of the community. Yeah. Sometimes, especially during, I guess when COVID was high in India and Philippines, it still is, but at the point wherein everything was shutting down, sometimes whole communities shut down. So being able to transfer the load of those volume calls to a different community actually just helped. And actually Optus was busier during COVID. To be honest. Yeah, so that actually created, if you think about it, it just magnified everything by tenfold. Yeah.
And how are you going to, or can you replicate that in the domestic space, or in the future? How will you take that community model and take that even further? Like, what would the next step for that be?
Well, the next step is it's just basically upskilling our teams to make sure that they don't just specialize in one area, that they can actually be experts across multiple areas. And to obviously mitigate that, there is a career path for them as well within those communities so they don't get stagnant. Yeah. So there is obviously they start as an expert and senior expert, and there's coach, there's continuous improvement managers, and then there's a community manager. So in that space, there is opportunity to then upskill and obviously progress if you want to by choice. So to create those options for them. Yeah. And it can be, the beauty of it is it's scalable, right? So you could be as small or as big as you want. Yeah. And eventually, if you want, you could even merge communities together. And serve a bigger customer segment. Yeah. So it's very flexible, very adaptable, and scalable. So I guess that's the practical side of it, right? Because it has to be cost effective as well.
Yes, there is still that.
It all comes back to cost, yeah, to a certain degree, yeah.
Interesting what you said about, encouraging that staff capability uplift in the communities. That's something that we've identified we really need to do with our broad population of staff, both increasing their just their general digital literacy, but also really looking at the platforms that we're using to understand, are we actually getting the most out of this? Are we using all the modules available to us? Have we actually done really sort of thorough audits of what we're using, where our gaps are? much more digitally literate, because we know the more that we can self-serve and do things for ourselves, the less reliant than we are on our sort of offshore partners in particular for those really simple things we should be able to manage ourselves.
Did you have to adjust your SLAs with your offshore partners?
No, we haven't adjusted the SLAs formally. What I am actually trialling internally with our centralised teams is what we're calling XLAs, which is an experience level agreement, which has a base level of service level agreements, but an additional layer which talks about values, how we'll treat each other, what you need to bring to transactions, how we form communities. So that, I think it's that next level of maturity of a service level agreement. And we're trying to do that to inject that sense of empathy and flexibility and understanding that, you know, it's people on all sides.
I love that experience level agreement. That's very different. Yeah, and
it is quite different. We're still playing with how we would measure, you know, experiences, and we've done actually the end of last year we ran our first service effectiveness survey across the whole stack of services that we in the main offer internally ourselves, to get a sense of what was important to our staff and how they were feeling across 35 different services. So we can build on that. So we've got a bit of a measurement tool, but yeah, building that sense of how you measure effectiveness or experience level is something I want to look into over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, keep us posted.
We'll do. And I want to hear where
case study.
Yeah, I want to hear where these communities go. I love this idea.
It's actually quite progressive, you know, and obviously it's not original to Optus. It was, you know, from T-Mobile, but you know, it was effective. The interesting thing we did though in Optus, we did offshore teams first. So we actually rolled out this team of experts community model in our offshore teams before our onshore team, because that's where the bulk of obviously the calls go to our offshore teams. Yeah. But our change network, you know, that operational change network was 100 members strong, actually 106, 106 members strong, representing 50 communities in, you know, offshore and onshore. So it was massive. It was massive. But the way we actually, the key is to be very structured about it. So because it's all ran in Agile, so obviously there's 2-week sprints and there's features so pardon to those who are not familiar with Agile, but every 2 weeks, obviously they have to deliver something. So what we did is basically identify success measures in each of those delivery periods and milestones, and use that to then validate with our change network to then, okay, well, these are the things that have been introduced to you guys for the past 2 weeks. How did it go? So we use that to keep up with the change, to make sure that, you know, we're not too far behind in terms of getting feedback, because it has to obviously be in lockstep with the change that's being introduced to the teams, which was very, very accelerated, as you can imagine. Yeah.
It is the best way to get that just-in-time feedback, isn't it? To be very discrete in your chunks of what you're delivering, and then just measure that rather than wait until you're halfway through it all.
And it wasn't that it sounded so smooth sailing, but actually getting the teams, one of the challenges as well, which is I think would be good to share. One of the challenges getting the change network together was that attendance. Some of them obviously couldn't get to work because of, you know, health reasons or transport reasons, or there's just no way. And then another, because, you know, attendance was so poor, their call volumes increase. So the amount of work and calls that they have to support increase. So they can't always go to the network to provide their feedback. So we've had to obviously work around that and make sure that we still give them the opportunity to talk to us, because it's very important. And then the third challenge is the way they are monitored, the way their performance levels are being monitored is obviously, if you know about contact center, metrics, it's very strict, right? So half an hour away from their desk can obviously impact their stats. So we have to obviously work with their KPIs. And in the communities, how we did it is it's not just based on individual KPIs, it's also based on team KPIs. So, an individual and team performance. So just to balance it out a bit. Yeah.
That's a nice idea of doing the team performance KPI as well. Yeah. So our KPIs aren't quite as contact center driven like that. It's more around satisfaction, how long it's taking to close tickets, a range of things for service desk. So we didn't have to modify those, but I think we took a more flexible perspective on viewing the stats that were coming through. But it's also really useful when you've got like a service desk that is reporting to you, because you can see those trends around what are your staff wanting, what are your staff needing at the moment, what are your students asking for at the moment, how is it last year, what are your volumes like? And then you can see whether, at Optus, you said that your volumes are going through the roof. Ours were probably about the same, but for very different services that were being asked for.
It's interesting though. One of the feedback that we received is that because contact centers are usually driven by those numbers, by stats, how fast do you close calls? How many calls do you receive? And one of the things that one of the change champions actually raised was that, well, what about the quality of service to the customer? Because, sometimes when you provide quality service, obviously it takes more time. But then it goes against you to actually take more time to close a call because, of the metrics that they've set. So because of those types of feedback, we're actually able to calibrate a little bit, right? And one of the things that was introduced is like one person who receives the call actually closes the call and resolves the issue. So it's what we call tofu, take ownership and follow up. Love tofu. But it's about, just taking accountability from start to finish. Yeah.
And from a customer service perspective, that's always so much better because you're not having to relay a story multiple times and you get the nuance correct around what it is that you're actually after. Or, I think from a customer perspective, that's always, we've seen that in our stats. If we can close things on the spot, or if it's the same person going back, then generally the satisfaction is higher from the user.
Definitely. And because customers are happier, the staff are also not as stressed because obviously there's no negativity feeding back to them, right? I mean, if a disgruntled customer is unhappy, then the energy flows back to the person on the other side. So it's a win-win, I think. So Mel, you did mention about skills and literacy, digital literacy. What were some of the challenges that you guys experienced on that front? I'm just curious.
So look, probably some of the interesting things for us have been because we've been working remotely, people or our staff or students not being able to access the VPNs or ways to actually get into files, or for our students who are offshore, particularly those in China, we've had to build different ways for them to actually be able to access content that's in Australia for those who are over in China. So it's some of the infrastructure pieces, but then we've just got, people who, aren't even really confident using Microsoft Teams. Or for those of you who use Teams, every time you log in, something's moved or a button's changed or there's a new functionality, or they'll learn how to do something one way and then the button will move and they'll be petrified and they won't want to, play or say, look or think, or, it's not their thing. So it's about building that sense of, confidence that you're not going to break it if you try and do something a little bit differently. So what we've been trying to do there as well is we've actually built a Microsoft Teams best practice team that we've put everyone that we've done training into, and we've popped them into a team site to try and get them to play and do different things in there. And then when new things are released, we'll put little notes in there saying, hey, there's this new functionality, this is what you can do, tell us if you want help, we'll do a drop-in session for you. So I think some of it's literacy, so not knowing how to use different functionality, but some of it is definitely confidence
Yeah.
Not just wanting to have a try because, well, you know, they're busy. Things are a bit stressful at the moment. I don't want to break things. I can't take my laptop into the service desk people on campus if I break it because I can't go to campus. So I think there's been a bit of a fear in those areas. But we're also finding that some of our staff in particular need support with some of the basic Microsoft functionalities, so Excel and Word, and we've never really provided that for staff because it's sort of assumed that you know how to use those things. So we're having to reassess the sorts of support and training and communities of practice that we need to be providing for staff, because none of that sort of training or support is built into any of our outsourced arrangements for
Yes, and I think especially with our outsourcing partners, they're so used to face-to-face training all the time, like classroom type training. So having to convert them to online training was obviously, you know, took some time to get used to, right? And because they're more used to face-to-face classroom type, you know, and being a bit more, I guess we hold their hands a bit more, right, in terms of how we train them, our offshore teams, because you know they're very specific in what they need to do as well. So that was interesting, yeah. And training rosters, right? So if you're talking about hundreds of people to do the training at the same time supporting your customers, you can't train them all at the same time. So there was a period of time, and until now, not everyone is at the same level of maturity or expertise. So everyone is almost at different levels because it really depends on when you go on your training course and then whether or not you have time to apply what you have learned, right? So there is that lag factor as well in terms of learning, training, applying, and actually being able to support it seamlessly. So lots of different things that come up, and you just really, you know, we just bit the bullet, right? But then all of these obviously come into the forefront as you roll things out. The important thing is to be able to acknowledge and understand, okay, well, how do we course correct? How do we then shift and adapt the way we roll things out because our people are not coping, you know? Yeah. It's about being flexible in that regard.
Yeah, being flexible and listening and giving them the power to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. I can't. The way I've been trained, I can't. It's not working for me, because we all learn in different ways, and working out what's actually going to connect and support. What we found is that you can do a training session with people, whether it's face-to-face or remotely or whatever, but what they really need then is that ongoing support, so that I forgot how to do this, or you know, I'm in our finance system and I only do accounts payable like once every 3 months, and I've totally forgotten how to like put this through. What do I do? So they're the sorts of questions that we're finding we really need those knowledge-based type arrangements for, really quick, like 30-second videos, like, are you stuck on this? Click here. And that's the sort of thing that we're now trying to be producing as well.
Okay, well, that's fascinating. I think, you know, it's interesting because obviously university and obviously telco, but then there's a lot of parallel threads and parallel experiences, because at the end of the day, we're really dealing with people here, you know, and all of us are in the same boat, you know, we're all dealing with crisis. We all have friends and family locally and overseas who are obviously experiencing COVID and crisis in different forms and in different ways. And I think for me, the greatest learning is really listen, you know, and empathy, you know, and leading with empathy and really listen to your teams and your people actually is the most important in this time. Yeah.
I totally agree. And putting our people and our voice, whether they're your staff or your customers or your communities or your families, putting them at the centre of everything that we're doing and making sure that we're designing experiences around them is just really, really important. Gingy, it's been so much fun talking to you today.
Likewise, yes.
We could have talked for hours and hours.
Definitely, definitely. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I really look forward to finding out what happens next in your next steps.
You too. Keep in touch and tell me what's going on.
Yes, likewise. Yeah, I might visit you in Canberra soon.
Please do. Not as bad as I made out at the beginning.